Canadian researchers are saying toss out that nutritional food guideline and eat more fat. It's good for you.
Hey YouTube, this is Klaus here from Plant BC. Thank you so much for tuning in. We have got a special episode coming up because yesterday the headlines worldwide erupted with news that carbs and not fat were to blame for the excess of chronic diseases and death worldwide. This is huge news because it goes against what I've learned in the last couple of years. We are joined today by Dr. Joel Kahn, a cardiologist. But first up, let's hear from Martika Hina, who is a nutrition professor. Dr. Hina, thank you for joining. Can you quickly explain the study?
Okay, yes. So this was a very large study. It's made headlines, as you pointed out, and researchers from around the world looked at over 135,000 people. And all of these people were in 18 different countries, some poor countries, some rich, some middle income. And what the study was trying to do was look at what all these people ate and then compare it to their risk or likelihood of dying from heart disease or another cause.
Now, a lot of people think the study was flawed. We're going to go to Dr. Kahn now and hear from him about why he thinks that the study was really, really flawed. And then we're going to come back to myself and Martika. So if you're going to watch this, just let us know what you think of Joel Kahn's kind of criticisms of the study.
This is 135,000 people in 18 countries, low-income, medium, and high-income countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Everybody ate what they wanted to eat. They got one questionnaire at the beginning of their involvement where they outlined what they ate. So therefore, over the next 7 to 10 years, if they change their diet, if the rice crop was bad or the potato crop was bad and their diet had to change, there was no follow-up data. What they did was follow up who was alive, who had a heart attack. And they made observations, and they made multiple computer-driven associations. They also stacked the deck a bit unfairly because they had detailed analysis of the content of fats in the diet. Was it trans, mono, poly, saturated fat? Carbohydrates, one giant lump. So if you ate an Oreo cookie, a croissant, or a sweet potato, or brown rice, it always called a carb. And they're very different, clearly, in terms of whether they're a whole food or a refined processed carb. So they did the same thing for protein. If you ate animal protein or vegetable protein, which we know have very different impact on survival and health in general, they lumped that all together as if it was stacked up to mainly identify fat and outcome and not particularly the details of the entire nutritional pattern. What they find, surprisingly, total carbohydrate, the only thing they measured for carbohydrate, was associated with a worse outcome, but we don't know, were they eating sugar, poor country kind of easy, inexpensive food, French fries roasted in sugar, who knows? But carbohydrate was associated with poor outcome. Fats, not so much so. And in fact, there was some advantage for increased fat intake. They had that detailed analysis. The conclusion many have drawn is that much of what's in this study we already knew, and it's a very imperfect study design. Many of the same people that are supporting the pure study criticize studies that are just like the structure in the plant-based nutritional world. They're observational, they're not randomized, the risk ratios are low. Probably the leading author, critic of the plant-based data is Gary Taubes, Nina Teicholz, who will say a study like this, if it was about plant-based nutrition, they'd say it's worthless, throw it out. Of course, I think I'm the only one in the world who said at this point, if you applied their criteria to this study, you would rip it up and throw it out. Now, I don't think you should. I think we should learn what we can learn. Don't pack your diet with a lot of refined carbs. But we already knew that. We know that added excess sugar, is a campaign every health expert is on board and should agree. We know that whole foods are good for you. The controversy is this data really adding anything to more than 100 years of research that animal-based saturated fats are related to raising your cholesterol, and raising your cholesterol is related to your risk of heart attack. I can tell you as a cardiologist for 30 years, your blood cholesterol matters. It's not the only factor in having a heart attack, stroke, or dying, but it's an important one, and you don't want to run the risk of a high cholesterol from eating lard, butter, coconut oil, beef, cheese, and the rest. You want to pack your diet with plants to bring your cholesterol down. So Many experts have said this confirms a lot of what we knew. The flaws in the study don't upend 100 plus years of research. There are better studies that have been randomized. There are better studies that have greater detail. The last comment, and I'm done, is what really is the current language of a lot of the nutritional research is, all right, I've got to eat dinner. If you're telling me refined carbohydrates are bad, what can I eat? If many people say animal saturated fat-based foods like butter, cheese, egg, meat are bad, what do I eat? What do we replace it? So Harvard has done a series of studies on that topic. If you take saturated fat and replace it with vegetable oil, polyunsaturated fat, your health will bloom. No such analysis was done here. The only suggestion in one of the tables is polyunsaturated fats from vegetable oils may be superior to saturated fat from animals. We already knew that, but it didn't really guide us what to eat because there's no analysis of that type.
So that was Joel Kahn's criticisms of the study. Is there anything to follow up on that, Martika, in terms of what flaws stand out to you?
The way they measured how people ate was using something called a food frequency questionnaire. This is a survey that asks you to remember what you ate on average in the last year. So if I was to ask you what you ate on average in the last year, do you think you could accurately portray what you ate?
No, definitely not. I see what you mean. Yeah, that's a pretty big flaw.
Yeah, so a better way to have collected that data would be to have people track what they ate every meal, every day for a week and write it down as they ate it and measure it and that kind of thing. That's a really accurate way. Even though there's still flaws with getting that data, it's much more accurate than an FFQ. Saying that, you can't get a food log from 135,000 people very easily and analyze all that data. So, but still that was a flaw. And the problem also with the FFQ is they had 18 different countries. So what people were eating in Brazil was going to be eating different than what they were eating in Malaysia and different than what they were eating in Sweden, all countries that were included, or Zimbabwe. And they tried to validate, they created FFQs for each region and they tried to validate and compare, but essentially they were using different measuring tools for all of the different 18 countries. And that actually is, a problem because it means you can't compare. If one country had more saturated fat intake, you can't really know if, what they had in different regions of it. India might have been accurately measured by this instrument.
Yeah.
Also, the FFQ didn't measure trans fat, and we know that trans fat has a big effect on heart disease death, and they didn't measure that at all.
Yeah, that's a definite flaw. We all know that trans fat is pretty bad. And I think also there's something to say about the fact that they only had to record what they ate like once in their lifetime. Is that correct?
That's probably the biggest flaw in this study. And it's a well done study in many ways. It was large and hard to do, but you would think that if they were measuring what people ate and following them over time, they would measure them more than one time. And all they did was measure them at baseline, which is at the start of the study. So, and on average, they followed the people up for about 7 years. So it could have been 10 years, it could have been 5 years. So if I was to ask you, for example, what you ate 7 years ago, would it be reflective of what you eat now and what you've been eating for 7 years?
Absolutely not.
How has it changed?
Well, for me, it's I've been eating a lot better. So 7 years ago isn't indicative of how I'm eating now.
Right. So if you had a disease or not now, it would be reflective of what you ate now as opposed to 7 years ago, most likely. Same for me. 10 years ago, I was eating tons of dairy, and I wrote an article in Plant-Based News about how I cured my asthma when I gave up dairy. And so for the past, say, 7 out of the last 10 years, I've had no dairy, which means very little saturated fat, a lot more whole plant foods. And my health is a reflection of what I've been eating for the past 7 years, not what I ate 10 years ago. And so if we look at the fact that they only measured these people, hundreds of thousands of people, one time, way back when, we don't know how many people they ate. So that's a big, it affects the validity of the findings completely, in my opinion.
I think, though, the main thing for me is not the study design or how the study was conducted. It's the media response. I really feel like these media outlets really twisted the results I feel like they're hyperbolic headlines with the main problem here.
Yes, so there's definitely lots of inflammatory headlines, and they seem to be saying that you should eat more fat, that despite all the research we have that shows that saturated fat, the kind of fat that's found, in high amounts in animal foods, we have research that shows we should eat as little as possible. This study, the way it's being reported, is people are saying that you should eat more saturated fat, that eating less is actually bad for you. And that's not actually, very good advice at all. And also it's saying that you don't need to eat a lot of vegetables. Just eat a moderate amount of vegetables. In fact, we have so much research that shows the more whole plant foods you eat, the more fruit, vegetables, and legumes, you are actually not only going to have, better health and be leaner, not be fatter. And we know that more saturated fat is probably going to make you fatter. The people that eat the most tend to be the heaviest. But you're going to have lower risk of disease and death from these chronic diseases like heart disease.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I've read some of the articles. Some of them are fair in the main body of the articles, but the headlines are just really, really bad. And the problem is most people won't actually look through the whole article. They'll just see the headline. And so the damage is done, really. And I guess the reason they do that is because people want to hear good things about their bad habits. They want to sell papers. They want a popular story and stuff like that. Do you think, let's just quickly talk about any conflicts of interest in terms of the funding. The study was funded by a number of pharmaceutical companies. Do you see that as an issue at all?
Well, I don't think that the fact that pharma companies funded this study, and this would have been a very expensive study to do, is necessarily a problem, because it's not like the meat industry funded it, and the authors state that they didn't have a role in the design, although sometimes that can be.
Yeah, but it's subtle, isn't it? I think we all know that we know that the pharmaceutical industries don't care about preventing disease, do you know what I mean? But I guess I see what you're saying. It's more indirect. Yeah. So just coming to the end now, for people that are thinking about adopting a plant-based diet or have just started a plant-based diet, what tips and tricks do you have for their kind of journey?
Well, we know from lots of research that most people do not eat enough plant foods, whole plant foods, fruits,
Right.
vegetables, beans. I recommend getting beans in every day, whatever kind of bean. There's all kinds of beans to eat: lentils, black beans, kidney beans, fava beans. Wherever you are, you have a bean that's probably, cultural. And beans have been shown to be very healthy. They give you lots of fiber. And more fruits. Try to eat at least 1 to 3 fruits a day, one with every meal as a snack.
Minimum.
Yes.
Definitely. Cool. And have you got any other closing remarks? Also, what's your Facebook? Dr. Martika Hina, right? I'll link that down below. And what's your Twitter handle?
So my Facebook is Martika Hiner, PhD.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
That's okay. My Twitter is Dr. Martika.
Awesome. I'll link those down below. And if you're new to Plant-Based News and you like the show, please subscribe for more plant-based news. And yeah, have a good day.